background on myself and TNC, some of the project objectives, the global metrics framework that I was working with that I then applied to some local case studies. We'll end with some conclusions and takeaways. Most of you here know me, but I wanted to just give a little background on how I got here today. I'm originally from Snohomish, Washington, way up there north of Seattle, where I grew up before attending University of Washington, Seattle, where I studied biology with a focus on ecology and conservation. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I went to UW and realized that I had a love for the natural world. From there, I ended up in Forks, Washington, doing forestry research, a long-term ecosystem productivity study, where I really had my first introduction to the complexities of balancing human needs and environment. From there, I ended up in Park City, Utah, not doing anything environmental related besides skiing and having fun, which led me to Aspen, Colorado, where I worked for the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. See some ACEs alum here, and worked as a naturalist and an educator for 3 years. And I'd say this was a really formative experience in my time, learning the importance of communicating environmental issues to diverse audiences, but also made me realize that I was seeking a little bit more than just the education field and wanted to get back into environmental problem solving and solution-based work, which brought me here. And not all of you are in this picture. This is from one of our first weekends together up at CSU Mountain Campus on our CLTL retreat. So with that, most of us here are familiar with TNC as an organization. Their mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends, with a vision of a world where the diversity of life thrives and people act to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill our needs and enrich our lives. I've been looking at the Nature Conservancy for a long time, so I was really excited for the opportunity to work with them on this project. They're one of the biggest conservation organizations in the world, operating in 72 countries through direct work through their partners. And something we'll cover a lot today is a big aspect of my project was scale. So working at this global level, but also focusing in on North America and Colorado specifically. So we can get into it. TNC is a science-based organization, which really drew me to their work, specifically through the open standards for the practice of conservation, which is a framework that we were all introduced to last year or this year through training. Our trainer is actually here today. Hi, Terry. And what really drew me to this framework was its basis in adaptive management. And this was a way of working that really called to me. Adaptive management involves implementing one or more solutions, closely monitoring their results, and then adapting actions from there through work. Sorry, I don't have my notes because of our tech difficulties. Yeah, so why adaptive management? It's flexible. It allows us to monitor changes in conditions and identify room for growth, change management actions, and share success and failures. Because something we've covered a lot throughout this course is the need to share information across different scales through organizations, within organizations, whether that is success or failures. So that's what really drew me to this framework, caused me to reach out to Terry to work with Nature Conservancy and see how I could apply this framework through my project. The goal of my capstone was to collaborate with global and local teams from the Nature Conservancy to apply the 2022 lands metrics guidance for improved management. My objectives were to develop case studies of improved management for the global team to use in their 2022 guidance, to develop tracking tools for each team to apply the framework, and to provide feedback to the Nature Conservancy on the improved management framework, which you will know what that is in a few slides. My deliverables were multiple theories of change, some case studies for improved management that would be included in the global guidance, recording tools for rating and track improved management, and some feedback. No, some
language. Just I got your cue cards over here.
So with that, I get into some of the more logistics. So this tree is a representation of the stakeholders I worked with, different to some of the other projects that were worked on with, where the stakeholders were out in the community, I had a really interorganizational approach to this. So I think I talked to 2 stakeholders outside of TNC, but worked with a huge diversity of teams within the organization. And as the presentation goes, I'll get deeper into each of these. But just to kind of show the scale of how this worked, over on the right, the Lands Measures Advisory Group is at the global level with members all throughout North America and other parts of the world. I had a regional project that says regional within the Southern High Plains Initiative, which is a 5-state initiative. That was one of my case studies. And on the local level, I worked within the Colorado Business Unit on 2 different preserves and with the urban team. So throughout this, I worked with probably 40 or more people throughout the Nature Conservancy to get feedback and help develop these tools and case studies. So we're going to start at the global level and work down. I can tell you this framework took me a little while to get used to, so I'm hoping I can make it as clear and understandable today for you all. So Nature Conservancy as a global organization works on, as we know, a ton of different projects. And as an organization of their scale, they need to set really clear goals to achieve. And what they have done in the last couple of years is separated the goals into these 17 different metrics under the realms of climate, ocean, freshwater, lands, and people. And within those metrics, within those goals, having really clear targets and metrics. Each of these 5 categories has a team dedicated to them to develop what the actual application of this metric looks like. So it's one thing to say, we want to protect 150 million hectares of land. What does that actually look like? How do teams report that? Because at the global level, they don't have access to just going down and asking every team. It needs to be reported back up, but those teams also need guidance. It's kind of this feedback loop within there. I work specifically with the lands team and specifically with the metric of improved management, where the goal was 400 million hectares by 2030. So a little more about the Lands Measures Advisory Group. They're responsible for defining this global metric for teams to measure conservation actions for lands that are important for biodiversity and carbon. So climate and biodiversity are 2 of the really important factors in TNC's work. So again, there's those goals. And I got to work really closely with this group through a few different meetings to apply this framework. Improved management is defined as a spatially defined land area, whether protected or unprotected, public, private, or communal, that is moved towards or maintained at a desired ecological condition. And I want you to keep the words desired ecological condition in your brain, because that's really what, whenever I felt lost throughout this project, coming up with rating scales, I came back to this idea of desired ecological condition is really what this is working for. The other 2 metrics, land area protection, at-risk lands with avoided conversion, are a little more straightforward. How much land has TNC bought? Is there a new preserve? That is a little more easy to measure. Whether land area has improved management, that becomes a little more complex. Some examples of improved management were prescribed burns, compatible grazing, which you'll hear a lot about today, restoration activities, invasives abatement. So all of these are the actions on land that TNC already has or is partnered with that improves the desired ecological condition. So this is where it gets a little into the details. So to come up with this rating guidance, they initially for years focused on the scope of benefit or hectares with improved management. And that was kind of where it stopped. So teams would report, we've done a prescribed burn on 100 hectares of land. And that's what went into the hub, which is TNC's kind of tracking tool online where teams can report the work that they've done. The problem with that was that actions were being recorded twice and not truly reflecting the amount of land that had improved management on it. So if in 1 year, a prescribed burn happened on 100 hectares of land, that would be counted, but then the next year, if that happened again, it would be counted as 200 hectares of land, then the next year 300. And to truly reflect what getting to that 400 million hectare goal, you can't double count these. And the other problem with that is it wasn't actually showing if there was a change in condition. And part of adaptive management is you need to show measuring and monitoring that actions are making a difference. So instead, building on the scope of benefit kind of as an umbrella, they added these conditions under degree of impact. So within the degree of impact, they're looking at ecological conditions, that desired ecological condition, management sufficiency, which is the actions that are being done. Are they being done to the extent that they need to be done? The term we started using was adequately. And durability, which you can think of as enabling conditions, are the factors needed to sustain that desired ecological condition into the future, present, and deployable. So it's one thing to be doing the actions and to be working towards the condition, but if you don't have funding, governance, management capacity, you're not really going to reach those goals in the long term and have a sustainable system. So I don't know if you'll be able to see my step 3. No. Well, step 3.
So if you want, you can drag that a little bit.
I want to touch anything.
Okay. I can see it if you need to.
Oh, I know what it
Okay.
says. But I hope I know what the third step is. You know this, you can say whatever.
Yeah.
I'm distracted. So step 3 was to actually rate these things. So rather than just giving a qualitative description of like what is the ecological condition or management sufficiency or durability, coming up with a number on a 0 to 5 scale that could be recorded year after year and truly reflect, give like a really easy way to look at whether conditions are changing, whether you're at the point you want to be at for management sufficiency or durability. So this is the framework they came up with. Up until my project, nobody had really tried to apply it to studies. So they'd come up with the definitions, the guidance they wanted, but no work had been done to really put it towards a project, come up with what an actual rating scale looks like. It should be said, my project was not to actually rate any of the case studies. I didn't have enough time or information to do that, but rather to help teams come up with the indicators that they would need to be able to do this work and report it out in the future. So I'll go a little deeper into each of these components really quick. Scope of benefit is that number of hectares of land that will be reported to the hub. And the way to think about that is you might have this whole project that's happening on a huge scale, 700,000 acres. But you're not going to be doing improved management on every single part of that land. So instead, the scope of benefit is looking at where are those conservation actions being done and reporting it that way. So as you can see through scale in this example, which is from the guidance itself, scaling it down to where that work is actually being done. Ecological conditions, some of the guiding questions that we had is asking what are the conservation targets? What are the key ecological attributes, which are those conditions that a species or target needs to be able to survive? And again, what is that desired ecological condition for the conservation target to be in? Is it achievable? Is it measurable? So using one of the species I'll talk about later is the lesser prairie chicken. What is like the desired population number? And I wrote it down in my notes as one of the examples, which at one of the sites, for example, if lesser prairie chicken was your target population was part of their key ecological attributes or their condition you wanted to measure, what's that number you need to get to? And so this, through many, many meetings, that 0 to 5 scale that a team could use, is what we came up with. One of the discussions we had throughout the project was that 0 to 5 is a kind of big range. And if your site only has 4 conservation targets or 4 indicators you're looking at, rating it from 0 to 5 might be difficult. But what we came up with was looking at those ecological components, defining what their desired condition is, and going through them and seeing either are all of the ecological components in desired condition, that would get you a 5. There's a few ranges in between. And if none of those ecological components are in desired condition and it's rated a 0, you have some clear information to know that there's some work to do there. So I hope that makes sense. For management sufficiency, we're asking questions about what management actions need to be done to achieve that desired ecological condition. Is it a prescribed burn? Is it invasive abatement? Is it habitat restoration for that lesser prairie chicken for their leks to be able to reproduce? Are there certain actions that are necessary and some that are not? So on any given site, there are a lot of actions that are going to be done. So going through management plans would have been really easy to take them all out, but instead choosing which relate to the improved management framework and really will work towards a desired ecological condition. And again, similar to defining what a desired ecological condition is, defining what is adequate for the action, which is going to be really qualitative and it's going to be dependent on the manager. Rating it. So similar scale, 0, none of these stewardship actions are being done adequately. To the majority, many actions, several actions, all. And the interesting thing with this one that you cannot read is that all the stewardship actions are being done adequately is actually a 4. And to achieve a 5, it involves doing those stewardship actions, but also having some proactive management actions on top of that to really be reaching that condition. For durability, as I said, thinking about enabling conditions is really important. So what factors are needed to sustain the ecological condition into the future? It's going to come down to financial resources, governance, community support and capacity, and management capacity. And similar to the adequacy or desired condition, are these factors secured? Do you have funding for X amount of years that you need to complete this project? And how will it be determined if these factors are secure into the future? And again, similar scale. And the reason these scales are similar to one another is relating to the scale of this project. And when you have a global metric that you're trying to get local teams to use, this framework needs to be easy and it needs to be usable. So if we made each of these very different from one another, that's another step for a manager who is already maybe reluctant to report to the global level. It's another step for them to have to do, but by making it really clear with a similar framework, you might get more buy-in and people using this. It's easier to learn. All right. We're going to move into the case studies now. So I worked on 4 different case studies throughout this project. For the first one, I'll get a little into the details, showing kind of those ecological condition indicators, sufficiency and durability that played into it. For the last 3, I won't list all the details. I will just get into some of the more fun, interesting things that came out of them. So Fox Ranch Preserve is a really cool ranch over in eastern Colorado. It's 14,000 acres. It's owned by the Nature Conservancy and leased out to a rancher, Nathan, who lives there with his family and does compatible grazing. There, it's a really interesting property. As you can see, it has this river going through. It's the Arickaree River. 9 miles of this river are along the ranch. It's groundwater fed from the Republican River Basin, and also from the Ogallala Aquifer, which is part of the Great Plains. And you get this huge ranch with this diversity of a riparian corridor through the middle with these really interesting grasslands surrounding them. I think that's all I wanted to share. I do not implore you to try to read this. As I said, part of this project was coming up with some theories of change. I have this up here more just to show the complexity of an area like this. Rather than a theory of change for the entire ranch, try to really focus it on the theory of change for improved management of the property. And something we came up with was scale. Given the different ecosystems you have there, it'd be really hard to come up with a 0 to 5 rating of the ecological condition when you have grasslands and you have riparian area. So kind of parsing those out, rating them individually, because the stewardship that's going on those lands is different. And then coming up with a scale, coming up with 1 score after based on the number of acres enrolled. So, as I said, don't try to read that. Some of the bigger takeaways from the theory of change is that the outcomes are high quality grasslands, high quality riparian area, and also the ranch being able to be used as a demonstration site for compatible grazing in the area. And another component is providing a livelihood for the lessee, making sure that the conservation and the livelihood protection were hand in hand. So some of the ratings we came up with, which are definitely going to be covered up with the bar, looking at the grassland area, thinking about components such as the percent cover and structure of native grass. This area is really interesting with tall grass, sand sage, sandhill shrublands, and short grass and forests. There's really important greater prairie chicken habitat there. And the number I read, which I remembered, is the 2020 goal was to have 10,000 greater prairie chickens protected on this area throughout the ranch. So looking at their Lex population numbers and habitat condition, and also grassland bird diversity. And again, we didn't rate these or come up with actual thresholds, but rather pass this to the managers, the people on the science team who can then determine what is our goal for greater prairie chicken numbers, what is the goal for percent cover and structure. The riparian area, again, looking at groundwater levels as a really important component, the abundance of non-native invasive species, like Russian olive and tamarisk, looking at the presence of young cottonwoods and willows to look at the regeneration and make sure that populations are recovering. Again, looking at riparian bird diversity and also beaver populations is an important component of that. So the Fox Ranch team has this information and they'll now be able to develop it into using a tool that I created to rate these things, come up with those thresholds and report it back to the hub. Management sufficiency, and I would have tried to read that. The interesting thing about this was that this framework, I didn't create it, it actually already existed through Anya Byers, who is another member of the Fox Ranch and Science and Planning team. And this is something she already uses to rate what's going on at the ranch. So going back to making this easy to use, what tools are already in the toolbox that people can adopt? So the bottom part, this is a stewardship framework that's used year after year for all of the preserves. The must do, those are kind of basic requirements that we didn't actually include as part of improved management because those come even before you do improved management. We focus more on the should do's. And again, this isn't all encompassing and this isn't exactly your use, but it's a good starting point to think, okay, what are the practices within here that you should be doing that lead back to improved management, such as invasives abatement in the riparian area, compatible practices for grazing, infrastructure maintenance, agricultural monitoring, ecological monitoring, habitat management and restoration, and ecological management. So yeah, this was great to use and the team was excited about it because it's one less step they have to do. The green and the yellow are ratings that Anya is already doing. So we thought this was cool to share and to be able to share globally in case people have similar tools that they're using. For durability, some of the factors to consider, again, funding, also the lessee income. Can the lessee afford to be there? Are they making enough money to ranch? Does TNC have management capacity to come out and monitor what's going on and support the lessee in their work? Something really fun I got to be a part of was this visioning. So this year, TNC, I think it's every 5 years, they go back to their properties and they do a vision of thinking about why do they own the property. And I got to be a part of it this year and go out to the ranch with this team and join a few meetings where they're talking about why do they own this property? What do they want from the property in the future? And part of durability is actually, does the organization have a need for this? And if not, how will that affect its management into the future? Does it feed into TNC's goals? So that was fun to be a part of. Also, the lessee's ability to graze into the future. We were there talking with the rancher. Something really interesting came up. It's been really bad drought out on the plains this year. And he was saying that there's a chance he won't be able to have the same amount of cattle next year if the water doesn't support his work. So not only is he making enough money, but can he physically be there? Some things to look at there are drought insurance, a drought plan, and the number of cattle. Similar to that, the water availability and infrastructure. some of the support he needed was getting water to different parts of the ranch to support cattle. And this feeds back into improved management because the grazing is part of the ecosystem there. And something that came up for me a lot throughout this project was climate, especially with durability. It's in my brain, like, how can we have any durability with climate change? Like, if all of these things are threatened, or if the environment is threatened by itself, it doesn't matter if we have enough money to pay for it, if a drought is gonna hurt an ecosystem anyways. Through many philosophical talks, we came to the conclusion that that's outside of TNC's sphere of control, so it shouldn't be included in durability. But what is in TNC's sphere of control is to plan for the future and to come up with strategies to build climate resiliency within reserves. So this is something that actually ended up being put into all of the improved management plans, is some sort of climate resiliency. The next preserve area focused on, which will not go so deep into the details, is Carpenter Ranch Preserve. This is out near Steamboat, right on the Yampa River, which we went to as a cohort last year. So bringing us back, another really interesting ecosystem, right along the river, really diverse riparian area, again with compatible agriculture going on. All up here, there's grazing, and there's also some hay meadows, which we'll talk about a little. It's a demonstration site as well. It's really cool. It has a lot of historic ranch buildings, which my boss Jen told me are haunted the day I got there. I made it out alive. So it's also a really important site for community gathering and for communication. Groups come out for birding, for restoration activities. So it has this whole other component to it. Something interesting as well I want to point out is this right here is a coal processing plant. So you're out at like 6 a.m. birding and you can like see in the distance this coal plant, which is a really interesting juxtaposition. Oops. Again, theory of change, don't try to read it. But the goals of this property are having higher quality hay meadows, more water in the river, and also high quality riparian areas. Different from Fox Ranch, there's no grazing allowed in the riparian area here. It's part of the management plan. So the goal of this is really just to protect it and minimize disturbance. Whereas in the hay meadows and other areas, it was about compatible grazing and providing an adequate income. Something really interesting about this property, that was my favorite takeaway, is there's this really rare riparian community. And this is one of the largest intact communities. It's found mostly in this stretch of the Rockies. It's narrowleaf cottonwoods, box elders, and red osier dogwoods. And one of the biggest communities is right here on Carpenter Ranch, which has added another reason of the importance of maintaining this property, protecting it. Our next philosophical debate of this summer was talking about the hay meadows and whether they count. So when we go back to these 2030 goals and all these different areas, there's a couple within here where there's crossover. So for example, a lot of the management actions being done in the hay meadows had to do with water infrastructure, planting drought resilient plants, new infrastructure to use less water from the river. And so part of that feeds back into this freshwater goal. And also in the people goal, people with increased sustainable place-based economic opportunity. These hay meadows are managed to produce alfalfa and other crops for hay to earn the rancher an income. So we debated it for a long time, whether is this land being managed for improved management, for biodiversity, for climate. Well, does anybody know this bird? What is it?
It's a bobolink.
Yes, the bobolink. So what's really special about Carpenter Ranch going into rare communities is that Carpenter Ranch is home to the largest nesting colony of bobolinks in Western Colorado. I didn't get to see them. However, where they nest is up in these hay meadows, and the management plan with the lessee is revolved around haying once the fledglings have left this area. So this area is being managed for biodiversity. There's also sandhill cranes that use the area. The drought resistant plants play into the climate plan. Yeah, so we determined after many conversations that due to the bobolink, Carpenter Ranch could report improved management from the Hay Meadows area. The next project we worked on was the Southern High Plains Initiative. This is when we get up to the regional scale. I don't know if I'm allowed to have favorites, but this was my favorite from a just a challenge to think about, because the Southern High Plains occupy Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. It's a 71 million acre region with the goal of 4 million acres of improved management. And again, with scale, you can't report one number across all of that. So we had a lot of thinking about what does this look like? And I ended up working really closely with Matt Bain, who is leading the Southern High Plains Initiative at regional level. We focused in on one strategy they're using to get to those 4 million acres. So you're not going to be able to just do one thing to achieve that. So one strategy they're using is this process of habitat lease agreements. They're working with private landowners throughout the region to come up with these leases with incentive payments to inspire conservation activities. And the idea was through these incentive payments, they would lead to behavior change and long-term ecological condition improvements through inspiring stewardship of lands, starting with these incentive payments. Again, this is a scalar challenge because how do you record one number for improved management? And that's where these strongholds come in. So the strategy they've come up with is prioritizing strongholds throughout the region, which is a 200,000 acre region, 150,000 acres at the core, with 50,000 acres surrounding the area as their core conservation areas. Within those, you have the ranches. And what we decided for improved management was, because every ranch is going to be different, was using that 0 to 5 scale for ecological conditions, efficiency, and durability at the ranch level, using a tool that I created for them to be able to keep track of that. And then through an acre comparison system, coming up with one total score for the strongholds, which is much easier to report to the hub. The entire Southern High Plains will never have one score for ecological condition reported to the hub, as far as I know. That could be a future goal, but really reporting at the stronghold or project level. So that scalar challenge was really interesting to be able to study and work with a few different teams on. So again, this is that theory of change and really focused on these rancher agreements through the incentive payments, leading to long-term behavior change, leading to the success of these strongholds and being able to scale this strategy to other areas. So right now there's 2 that are being piloted, and the goal is to have 5 200,000 acre strongholds implemented in the next 10 years. I think it's by 2030. And that is a piece of this improved management at an additional 4 million acres. And 2 huge components of this project for TNC is working with partners. So they're not going to do all this work by themselves. And there's a lot of building community trust in here. This is where the lesser prairie chicken came in. That was the conservation target that was prioritized for the first stronghold. And each stronghold will probably have a conservation target that is kind of the indicator for the area. Just wanted to show, when I first learned about the Southern High Plains, that was originally just going to be my project. It's like, I go into the prairie this summer. I stayed here, but learning about this area, there's a huge amount of biodiversity, and I think it really changed my perspective on these regions. From pronghorn antelope, these canyons, lesser prairie chickens, bison, rivers and hills. There's bighorn sheep. There's, I don't have my notes, tons of birds. But there's a huge amount of diversity in this area, and I didn't get a chance to visit it, but I hope in the future, maybe my next road trip east, I will get to stop right there. All right, my last case study was the city of Denver. So TNC is a really robust program in Denver where they are working to promote climate resiliency for people and nature through equitable tree cover and also through policy change. So really great program, improving parks, improving livelihoods. However, if you remember our hay meadow debate, philosophical talk number 3. That was the name of the meeting, actually. So if you go up to this metric, people benefiting from nature to adapt to climate change. Because the goal of the Denver Urban Project was actually more focused on people adapting to climate change, reducing urban heat island effects, creating equitable outcomes, we decided not to include it as a case study in this project. Not to say TNC in Denver or the city of Denver are not doing any ecosystem management for biodiversity and carbon. They definitely are. But we thought it was actually more important to include a case study of when not to use this framework. And I got to create some language that's included in the global guidance for when urban areas would not count. Denver is doing great work for biodiversity. They're really interesting land typology manual. If you ever need something to get you like jazzed up, where some of their parks are being managed for biodiversity. But for this instance, we decided to just put the Denver project in the climate metric and not in the land area with management. So the next steps for the work that I've done on the TNC side, the teams will define specific indicators to rate at each site and come up with those actual numbers and be able to report it out to the hub. The case studies I've created are in the global guidance document or will be soon. And teams around the world, as they try to apply this metric to their work, will be able to look at my work, and hopefully it helps make the process a little bit easier for them to report this metric. And the tracking tool that I made, which was more of an Excel sheet for teams to refer to, someone on the global team is going to develop it into a more usable tool. So I'm excited to see what comes from that. Some of my conclusions and takeaways from this work, connecting scales in larger organizations. Just thinking about when a global metric is created, it's really hard to get people to apply it to the local level, especially when you're working in 72 countries. So how do you create one metric that everyone can report up to? And though it was challenging for me to understand at first, I think that this is a really interesting tool that hopefully will be easy for teams to use to let TNC show their results at that global level. Another conclusion that came out of it, which I didn't touch on too much, was the importance of incorporating different types of expert knowledge. There were talks throughout, especially in the Southern High Plains Initiative. How do you collect ecological condition data across 200,000 acre strongholds when there's potentially hundreds of ranches there? Because in my head, like Western science, you need to get people on the ground out there. You need some interns going to collect data on every ranch. But you have experts there, and those are the landowners who are on the ground every day. And that applies across the different preserves as well. So really focusing, the guidance at first kind of had a rating scale of levels of evidence that we talked about removing, because including in indigenous protected areas and some of these ranch areas, there's experts there, and to make your work easier, especially with the habitat lease agreements in SHPE, we call it, you have those tools. It reinforced the importance and my love of adaptive management. Just thinking about how important it is to measure and monitor along the way, because you can be doing all of this management, but if you don't have data to show that it's working, there's nothing to report to funders. There's nothing to show that your actions are working. So learning, adapting along the way, I still think it's really important. And climate resiliency, just focusing on how can all the work we do store more carbon and protect people's livelihoods. Personal reflections. I had a really great summer working with Terry and learning about this framework. I thought it was really interesting. I expected my project to maybe be like on the ground with stakeholders, and I think having this opportunity to see so many levels of the biggest conservation organization in the world was a really interesting opportunity, learning from experts and yeah, just being really adaptable. So I had a great summer. I'm going to say thank you to Terry Schultz. She's a senior ecologist at TNC. We worked really closely with Drew Rayburn as well, who's their director of science. Also to all the TNC teams who met with me, took multiple meetings just to try to apply this framework. during a really busy summer. Dawson, Brett, CLTL professors, also my peers, who are all here today, friends, family, coworkers at the Salazar Center for all your flexibility this summer. Yeah, that. I'm done.
Good job, Sho. Yeah.